everyone, and welcome to my channel. I'm Reina Creole, and this is an audience with the Queen, my podcast series where I like to just interview folks who just pique my interest and find out more about him and introduce you, my subscribers, to these new folks. So you can go and check out their channels. And I'm very excited to have Jay Sherer here from the OG 55 crew. Had the pleasure of live streaming with him to review the latest episode of The Mandalorian, and it was such a great time. I had to have Malta myself, so welcome to the show.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Thanks for coming on the Story Geeks and being a part of that Mandalorian experience. And thanks for having me on. It should be a really fun conversation. And I am rocking my
I
Orange
see
Grove
Orange Grove
55 merch over here. Yeah,
55.
the microphone keeps getting in the way, but I'm wearing the merch.
Well, number one, every time I see OG stuff, I'm just like, yeah, I know. I really I gotta get my merch store back. It's like I had it and then I kind of ignored it to do other stuff, and I've got like artwork piled up. So I'm like, okay, I need to do that. So every time I see OG has something, I'm like, okay, I really need to get on there. And also, it's like I have like anytime I have a jacket with like a logo on it, Mike covers it up.
Yeah. Oh, it's always the mic always covers everything up. Yeah, such a bummer.
I hate it because I just bought this. Well, I didn't. I bought maybe a month ago, I guess, maybe 2 months ago. I don't know. I dropped money on it. I got a hoodie from Walt Disney World that
Oh,
celebrates,
nice.
100 years of Disney, because first of
Yeah.
all, it's like stitched on the back and had to have five, and at Disney 100, and on the lapel it has like Mickey with this platinum outfit on it. It looks so cool, and darn Mike covers. I'm
You
like,
can only do so
really?
much. Yeah. What a bummer. That sounds like a cool hoodie,
Ugh.
though, I have to say.
It is very, very cool. I haven't really been impressed all that much with Disney's fashion offerings, and that didn't used to be the case. So it's
Mm.
been quite a while before I've invested in anything. So there's two things that I've bought. One was a 50th anniversary shirt that looked like I want to say it looked like a jersey, like it had the
Oh,
stripes on the
cool.
side and it had like the 50th logo. So that was pretty cool and very popular. So I saw a
Yeah.
lot of people wearing that particular shirt. So that was gorgeous. And then there was this zip up hoodie. It had like firework fireworks patterns, like white, but like fireworks starburst on both arms, and the heavy embroidery on the back, and then the logo on the front. It just sold it. So it was really artsy, really cool looking, and a lot of people. It's popular when you start seeing a whole bunch of people
Yep.
wearing the same thing. So I absolutely love that hoodie. I think that's probably my second favorite one. My favorite hoodie is one that I bought from Imagineering when I visited their Burbank
Oh,
like years
nice.
ago. Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. I have uh I have one piece of merch that I can think of that I got at a Disney park. Usually my wife buys the merch and I don't buy any of the merch, but I got and I actually got it off their website because I was in Florida when they started the 50th stuff, I believe. But I didn't
Hmm.
see this hat anywhere. But they had a Vans collaboration where they did a 50th anniversary of WDW hat, and it has just Mickey and the castle on the front of it. And I go, that's a cool hat. It says off the wall on the back because it has the Vans branding on the back,
Oh.
which is super cool. And so a lot of times I don't buy the Disney merch just because Disney merch is something that you can usually wear to Disney parks, but it's a little bit harder to work into an ensemble if you're just out and about.
Hmm.
And so I'm like, but that hat's cool because I wear a lot of gear that's like Vans inspired, right? And so I go, I'm gonna buy that hat. Well, then I go to California to see family, and I'm walking around the parks, and everybody had the hat. So they took it from the being a 50th anniversary hat at WDW, and then said, "We've got a
Hmm.
lot of these. Where else can we sell them?" And they started selling them at Disneyland. So then everybody had them. And I'm like, well, okay, everyone has it now. It's not special anymore. But I still think it's a cool hat. I still like the hat.
Yeah, cool. I always find it seems the third party companies, when they get the Disney license, I'm constantly impressed by what they do. Case in point, Loungefly. That I had to stop buying bags. I have six.
Nice.
I have
Nice.
6 bags. I have one that looks like, Yoda, not Grogu, but like Yoda. So I have that
Nice.
one, and barely got out of World of Disney alive with it because people saw it and they were like, "Well, where can I get that?" I'm like, "They don't have any more. Sorry. Let me go
Oh
check out."
no.
Oh, it's like that one. I have like a Oogie Boogie one
Oh,
that
cool.
looks like him. It glows in the dark, and on the lining on the inside, it has like the worms. I've got one for Christmas. I've got what the heck else? I've got well, I've also got a Sherer one in My Hero Academia, but that's separate.
Nice.
I got those separate right there. That one, which is full of sequins because I love bling. And then the latest one that I got, but I actually bought that online, is a Tinkerbell Loungefly, complete with wings.
Nice.
And I get so many looks. People will walk by me and then they'll walk back, and, and people are like, "Where can I buy that?" I'm like, "Unfortunately, not at the parks, but they had two that I saw that really interest me, and that kind of segues into kind of like story writing, which I want to ask you about.
Yeah.
One, and I recognized it right off the bat. It was Mickey in his band leader outfit from the cartoon, the band. Oh gosh, what was it? The band concert.
Yes, 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 yes. Yes.
You've ever seen that one? It's so funny. I love it, and my nieces and nephews thought it was the most hilarious thing they had ever seen, until I had them watch Steamboat Willie, which is the other bag that they had, and they have like
Oh,
the
that's a cool
scenes
bag. I've
from
seen
the.
that one.
It's so awesome, and it has like the movie reel and stuff that's on it.
Yeah.
It's amazing pieces like that, especially with these licensees, can go into these stories, pull out the moments that you just cannot forget. And every time you have that piece of merchandise, you're constantly, reliving that. So I want to ask you, what do you think is so appealing story wise about those two cartoons, because they were done so long ago, even though now they're available in digital. It doesn't seem to matter what generation you are, even down to like little tiny Gen Z, or I guess Gen Zero, because they're like 6 and 7 and 8 years old, where they'll watch the modern Disney cartoons, the redrawn Mickey Mouse, but they will go back and watch those and think they're the funniest thing on the planet.
Yeah, you know what? I think there's something to do with storytelling, that stories can be these meaningful things that we invest our time in, and they all speak to us in slightly different ways. But each story will speak to different groups of people in in different ways, and people respond to them different ways. But one of the things that I think early Disney stories did really well, just Walt was really good at this. He was able to capture a wide swath of the population in terms of how they
Mm,
responded to things, right? And so the things you'll find in his cartoons, they don't. It's not trying to be for any one kind of person, or for any one kind of ideology, or any kind of one kind of experience. It's more of a collective. It's more of a, hey, we all think this is funny because we can imagine ourselves in that scenario. And so when we can imagine ourselves in that scenario, it just comes alive. And Disney was so good at doing that kind of stuff. You know what I mean? Like they just captured it so well in those beginning years. And I think that's one of the reasons why, you know, what I will say too, there's a lot of slapstick type of comedy in there, and that is one of the forms of comedy you will see kind of cross culturally, because sometimes
ah,
different cultures have different forms of comedy. But one thing that is, I think it's, one of the reasons TikTok is so popular right now too, is that slapstick is something that we all laugh at. When you see somebody and they trip and they fall, and as long as they're not seriously hurt, it's just funny because we know what that's like. It's embarrassing, and it's at the same time it's cartoonish, and I think that
Hmm.
it just captures kind of this wide range of people who resonate with it.
Wow, that is so very true because even when I'm like say I'm at the parks
Mm.
and Philhar Magic, which I love that attraction. It doesn't matter where the tourists are from, even if English is not their first language, they find that whole thing just hysterical with Donald getting into the situations that he gets himself in. And there's just something so very connecting and endearing when you get to share that experience.
Absolutely. And Donald's a perfect character for that too, because he is already sort of grumpy. And so when he gets into those scenarios, it's almost kind of like you feel like he not that he deserves it per se, but it's almost like a okay, we kind of expected you to have to change your view after failing because you were kind of being a pill about this, Donald. You know what I mean? Like so it kind of works. It works really well for his character. And of course, Mickey was very much of a rascal in the beginning of his time on screen.
Mhm.
And then as he became this iconic character, Disney kind of said, and you can see this in the Mickey documentary that they did on Disney Plus. You can see him go through this change where he's not as much of a rascal anymore because we don't want him getting in trouble. That might send the wrong message to kids. And so then you start to see these other characters get involved, and those characters serve as kind of the rascal roles, right?
Mhm.
Whether it's Goofy who gets into trouble because he's kind of just not paying attention, or whether it's Donald who gets into trouble because he's being grumpy and he kind of needs to learn a lesson. And it's kind of interesting the way that they've weaved those characters in over the course of time. And now, even now Mickey in the new shorts, he is kind of a rascal again in some of those shorts. So they've kind of just transformed Mickey over the years to have different elements of culture appear in there and speak to a wider degree of people, and it's really fun stuff.
Yeah, it's extremely fun, and it's funny how you say like that Mickey is a rascal. That's probably why Steamboat Willie is one of my favorites. Even people I know, they're just like, "Oh my gosh, it's hilarious." And a friend of mine who'd never seen it before, he's like, "Wow, Mickey's in." He's chewing tobacco and spitting it.
That's right.
He's doing animal, quote unquote, animal cruelty, because the cow ate the music for Turkey in the Straw, and he takes his tail and he's, he's wagging his tail, he's throwing potatoes at that annoying ass parrot. And he's just like, man, this Mickey's pretty cool. Where did he go?
Yeah, exactly. It's awesome. It's awesome. And all of those things kind of resonate because they kind of say, we know what it's like to be frustrated, and we know it's like to be like, you know, to mess around with another person or make fun of another person. And those things are, I think, back in the day, I think people had more things to worry about. We're a little bit more sensitive in today's day and age with what can and can't be made fun of. But
Mhm.
back in the day with Walt, it was just a little bit more innocent in its making fun of things. And so we just kind of, everyone kind of goes along with it. We don't think of animal cruelty because we think, well, we wouldn't do that. And no one's advocating for us being cruel to animals. And so it just ends up being funny. And that's the whole point of a cartoon, is that a cartoon can do things that we would never be able to do in real life, and it's funny because of that, because we don't assume that we can go do that in real life. We assume it's just a cartoon and that's what's on screen. And when people get hurt in a cartoon, they're not seriously injured. It's all fine. Um, and those things work really, really well. That hyperbole, works really well in those kind of situations.
Mhm. Absolutely, absolutely. Like I told people, I watched a lot of Roadrunner
Oh
and
yeah.
Wile E. Coyote, but I wasn't dropping anvils on people.
Exactly. Exactly. Or running off the edge of cliffs and then realizing that you don't have anywhere to go, and then you
I
finally fall.
know.
Yeah.
Oh man. Well, first of all, what started you on your let's see. I'm trying to figure out which question to ask you first.
Mm.
Hmm. I'll ask you the Disney question. So, what started you on your Disney journey?
Mm, that's
Like,
a good question.
what got you into it?
Yeah, so I was born in Southern California and grew up in Southern California. And
Mm,
so, I think actually one of my first memories that I've ever had is of Disney, because I remember being there when I was 3 years old. And man, I mean, when I say I remember being there, I remember like flashes of like being in front of the carousel and being around some of my family in front of the carousel, and then also being on Pinocchio, because there's one of the places on Pinocchio where you go around the corner and there's the really scary looking Jack in the Box coming out at
hmm.
you,
Yeah,
and you know that one. That's
yeah,
like
I
ingrained
did.
in my head from being a little kid, because I remember it from being a little. It like freaked me out. Um, and then as I got older, what sort of happened was that living in Southern California, Disney had these. It knew how to do a couple things. One, they were really good about taking the experience outside of the parks and including it inside the parks, so that you always wanted to go to the parks. And by the way,
Hmm.
I would say that I'm more of a parks person than I am even a movie person with Disney and stuff like that. Just because I really enjoy being at the parks. So as Southern California is getting more and more, what word do I want to use? Complex. And as like social media is starting and things like, I mean, this is like when I'm a little older, but it started to be like you got less and less involved with your neighbors, and so therefore like going to the park, for example,
Hmm.
seemed like it was like, I don't know if I should go to the park anymore. Like when I was a kid, we used to just run around and go all over the streets and go everywhere. But then as you started hearing more and more stories about like, well, this is a bad place to be and that's a bad place to be, your parents started making that circle smaller and smaller. But
Hmm.
Disney was always one of those places you could always go, and you could always expect that it was going to be, everyone was going to be on good behavior. They were monitoring the parks. You could go there
Hmm.
as a teenager and not feel like you were going to get into trouble. I mean, not any serious trouble. I did have
Right.
friends that got kicked out of Disney at certain points for doing stupid things that they should have got kicked out for. Um, but I think that, my cousin worked there. She was in the Lion King parade. She would sign us
Oh.
in every now and again. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
her husband. That's where she met her husband too. He was in the Lion King parade as well. Or they might. I think they met outside of Disney and then worked at Disney together. Um, but I would go. So I was like, I was there for Indiana Jones, and I'm a huge Indiana Jones fan. Indiana Jones is my favorite franchise,
Yeah.
and I was there for the opening of that, and not the opening day, but the opening year. I was there for that. And then when my wife and I started dating, I said, you know what we should do? We should get passes to Disney. I've always wanted to have a pass to Disney. I had never had a pass up until that point. This is in 2005. So this is before um, California Adventure became more Disney, and it was still just California Adventure, just California themed. And so we got passes, and we would just use that as like a date night. And we kept those passes for we don't have them anymore, but we kept them up until basically the pandemic. So we had passes for over a decade, and we loved
Hmm.
it. We would be like, hey, we need to do a date night, and it was like, well, let's go to Disney, and we would have a really fun time there. And one of the things that Disney is so great at in the parks is putting you in an environment that is full of art and operated really well. They've had some more hot operational hiccups lately, but 10 years ago, their operations were stellar. I mean, it was
Hmm.
just stellar operations, and you would go there and it would constantly engage my creative brain. It would engage my business brain and go like, how do they do this? And then how do they operate this ride? And where do they get all this creativity to put this story together? And I've always found the parks just to be a really joyful experience. I love the parks.
You sound like me. You sound like me. Since I lived in the Northeast, like outside of Philly, um, it was almost like a rite of passage with your friends. Like, you going to Disney? Yeah, yeah, yeah. We're going to Disney. We're going to Disney. We're going to pack up the car and we're going to spend I don't know how long on I-95 to get to Disney World, and it was like an epic journey, like everywhere going south on 95. I mean, the trip could be anywhere from 900 to like 1100 miles. Every single stop had to have something to do with Disney World. Whether it was
That's
Van,
awesome.
whether it was whatever, that was like the whole I don't want to say shtick, but it's true, because when Walt came to Roy and said, "Hey, I'm going to build this park," basically swampland in Florida, and Roy's like, "Okay, because with Disneyland, that's a very local population, and now you're telling
Right.
me you want to build this theme park in a swamp in Florida where not a whole lot of folks in Orlando, does not make business sense." And Walt's like, "Well, we just got to get the people from up north to go down to Disney World." So they finally, I think I-95 was in pieces. It wasn't complete, but by the time it was complete, that is basically the superhighway from Maine all the way down to Miami. Heavily, heavily traveled. And most of the people going to Disney. So I would love going, if that was like something I look forward to, like going to the parks when we could go. We had family lived in Florida, so of course we had to stop and see them. The years we couldn't go was like depressing. We couldn't really go, but now that it's like I moved down here, it's like I wanted to like have passes. Almost didn't get that chance because of the pandemic. But once sales opened up, I ran down there and I got annual passes. And it's just something about being able to go to the parks, especially to walk down Main Street. That is still one of my favorite things to do. Walk down Main Street, enjoy the environment, notice how even the music changes depending on what time of day it is, and where you are, the theming, the fireworks, even if you just go to the resorts. Well, the ones that have not been overhauled, I'm still pissed about the Polynesian. Uh, but like say the Animal Kingdom Lodge, you just
Mhm.
go there and just how themed it is. It's just something about making that real. Like I say on my channel, the reason that I like theme parks is because theme parks are the physical manifestation of pop culture. So it's like it's
Mm.
something tangible, that you can go and see. You can go from like say seeing a Cinderella animated cartoon to going to the Magic Kingdom and you see Cinderella's castle there rendered, and you could actually meet Cinderella. If you wanted to watch the movie Pirates of the Caribbean, guess what? That ride's been there forever.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Go and check it out. But you're right. There's operation wise. It was impeccable like 10 years ago. Rare that an attraction went down, but now lately, Pirates of the Caribbean has been down. Although I hand it to the cast members because they were actually reenacting the Pirates of the Caribbean ride.
No way. That's
That
awesome.
was funny. I caught that on a live stream. I'm like, look, they had tape that looked like the boat, and the cast member had like some people. They just sat in the sections of the boat, and they're basically reenacting the ride. I'm like, okay, that's cool. Still wish the darn attraction was open, but it seemed to be down a lot more than up. Big Thunder Mountain, that was down. Uh, just really not the way that was, but
Yeah.
still there's places and things in there that you can do at the theme parks that give you an atmosphere that you're not going to find anywhere else.
Absolutely. You don't find it anywhere else. You can't, I, one of the things that we talk about a lot of times on Orange Grove 55, is that we talk about, well, why do people love Universal? And Universal's great. Why do people love Knott's Berry Farm if you're in California? Why do people love Disney? And, Disney has such a wealth of IP. And I don't mean new IP because they bought it. I mean, even just the existing IP of like having done Steamboat Willie, however many years ago that was now, almost
Mm-hmm.
100, right? Like it's like,
Yep.
or maybe even more than 100. And so Disney has this rich history of storytelling And then they said, would you like to be in experience those stories not on a screen but in person? And then they infuse the parks with those things. And it is pretty difficult. It is pretty difficult not to beat that, because, you know, I think I've seen, you know, the first through the fifth Fast and Furious. And then I went,
Hmm.
these aren't changing my life. They're fine. They're like kind of fun. So that IP is not ingrained in who I am and how I understand some of the world. But some of Disney's IP is literally ingrained, like the Star Wars IP, the Indiana Jones IP. Excuse me.
Yeah.
I've shaped my I've shaped like part of my understanding of the world and interacting with the world around those IP. And of course, you know, I have a different belief system than you might see in those properties, but at the same time, I've invested so much in those properties that it's so easy for me to show up to Disney. And there's not a lot of other people that have that kind of IP. I think Harry Potter is one of those IPs that people can
Hmm.
get really involved in, mostly a younger generation than me, because I'm a little too old for that. But you know, there's I think that Disney has so much, this wealth of stories, and they can just do a lot with that in the parks. It's amazing.
Yeah, it really is that they have, they have this wealth of IPs that they can pull from. And I know, like, for example, granted, it's being overhauled now, but Splash Mountain, that's like, I have a book of Uncle Remus tales that my grandmother
Mhm.
gave me because she actually used to tell the stories to my dad. Matter of fact, he got in trouble at school for telling one of those stories. But it was like I got to see physically rendered all
Mm.
of those stories. All those stories from that book, even Buzz Lightyear's spin. I love
Yeah.
Toy Story. It's like everything looked just like it came straight, straight out of the Pixar film. There's just so many things that when they do that, yeah, they have an absolute wealth to pull from. Universal is a little different. Tell people it's kind of separate. I would say separate properties, not in a cohesive bubble like Disney is. Like the
Yeah.
Transformers, that was a movie franchise I loved. I loved watching the cartoons. So you had Transformers. The Simpsons, of course, I watched The Simpsons. I mean, I haven't watched them in the last 10 years. It hasn't been funny, but they did have that. But they also had the Back to the Future attraction before then. And I loved, the Back to the Future
Oh,
movies.
some of the best. Yeah.
Yeah. Jaws, I really wish they hadn't closed that attraction. It was cheesy, but I loved it because to see the animatronic shark come out of the, come out of the water. But it's kind of disjointed with that. Their IPs is kind of like a collection of different ones. Like now they've had Despicable Me, and now they're building, Minions Land to go to that. But there's still something very, very special. And they do call it the Disney difference, that when
Mhm.
you go there, the storytelling is different, you know.
Yes. Yes, they just do. They've consistently done an impeccable job. Now, that doesn't mean that they don't have decades of time where they've not done the best. But they always tend to self-correct pretty well too. You know, even like I mentioned earlier, DCA, when it first came out, DCA was not, it was odd. It didn't feel quite right. It didn't feel like Disney, and it was supposed to be the anti Disney kind of park that just felt more Southern California, almost like an amusement park as opposed to a
Mhm.
theme park. But Disney corrected that. They figured out over time, like, well, why do this when people love what we already do, and they adapted it, right? One of the
Yeah.
best examples I think of that is they used to have, I can't remember what the name of it was. Oh, Mulholland Madness was the name of their mouse coaster. And it was called Mulholland Madness because there's a street in Los Angeles called
Oh,
Mulholland,
Mulholland
and it
Drive. Yeah.
exactly, and it's
I've been
very
on it.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Fun fact, I grew up there and have never been on it. So I just never got around to
Really?
it. Yeah, I don't know why. Never got around to it. But they rethemed that ride. Once they ditched the California theme, they rethemed it to Goofy Sky School, and they added elements that feel very much like Goofy is learning to fly, and that's the kind of thing that it draws you in, because you go, it's the same coaster, But why
Mhm.
is this one more fun than the previous version? Because I love Goofy and the way that they added theming too to it. So you go, you like looks like you're going through a billboard at one point in time, like he's crashed through a billboard, and that kind of stuff is just that is the Disney difference. When they figure it out, oh, we messed up. They usually self correct and do it in a way that makes a lot of sense. Now that's not always the case. If people listening or watching will be like, well, there's this one. What about this one? And what about that one? Yeah. They've gotten some of them wrong. Don't get me wrong. They've gotten some things wrong, but they do tend to over time realize where people are at, what kind of stories people like, and they will
Mhm.
adjust accordingly.
Yeah, I really wish they would adjust that Tigger ride back out of Magic Kingdom and put it back to Mr. Toad's Wild Ride, but I
Yeah.
don't.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm still gonna be mad about that. If they take Mr. Toad out of Disneyland, I'm gonna riot.
Oh yeah, that's too much. You can't go there. You can't go there.
Mm-mm. Mm.
There's something I will say this. Let me ask you this question too, and see if you've noticed this. And because maybe I'm noticing something that's not real, but it feels like this to me. It feels like Walt's the further back you go and the closer back you get to Walt's original rides,
Mhm.
not all of them, but a lot more of them have sort of like a morality tale mixed in. Because Walt did that a lot with his stories, right? There was some sort of morality tale that he kind of infused into a lot of his films. But the further we get away from Walt, the further it seems like we get away from those morality tales into more simplistic, sort of like, well, we don't want to offend anybody, so let's just put this. So I'll give you an example. Mr. Toad's Wild Ride literally is a don't drink and drive message.
Yes.
Right? Like it's literally like you're already getting in trouble because you're hanging out with the weasels, and then you go
Mhm.
through and the judge says you really shouldn't do this. You go through a bar on your way out, you turn the
Yep.
corner, you drive wild, you end up in hell. Right?
Yes.
It's very severe. And then I was looking forward to the retheme of the coaster. What did they used to call it before it was the Incredicoaster? I can't remember what they used to call it, but the coaster that's in DCA, and they were going to retheme it to the Incredibles, which they did. Now
Mhm.
it's called the Incredicoaster, and they rethemed it. And I'm thinking to myself, here's a cool chance for us to get to see like a story that we get to experience with this ride.
Oh, was it California Screaming? I'm sorry.
California Screaming. It was
Okay.
totally California Screaming. Good pickup.
Okay.
Yeah, good pickup.
Okay.
Yeah, that's exactly what it was. And so California Screaming turns into Incredicoaster. And I'm thinking we're gonna get like a cool story because The Incredibles has like some pretty cool stories associated with it. There's some
Yeah.
depth there. And instead we get a ride that's basically like we lost Jack Jack, let's go find him. There's no morality to it. There's no like Jack Jack doesn't get in trouble at the end of it. Like it's just kind of like a very simplistic story told that isn't really having anything to do with informing us about how we might want to live because of there's a better way of living here. And I thought that was really interesting because it seems like we're facing more and more of that unless the new ride is related to an old movie that they tell the story of the movie. Like Ariel's Undersea Adventures a little bit better that way because it just tells you the story of the ride, which is
Mhm.
about Ariel making a deal with the devil, so to speak, and Ursula to get
Mhm.
something. But of course, it comes at a price, right? Um, and so I just feel like. So, what do you think? Do you think Disney is sort of kind of shifting away from some of these morality tales that it has relied upon in the past, or do you think that they're still working that stuff into the parks from time to time?
I would have to agree with you. And two
Okay.
examples. There used to be an attraction at the Magic Kingdom called Snow White's Scary Adventures.
Mm.
I read Grimm's fairy tales, of Snow
Mhm.
White. I loved going on that ride because it was scared the crap out of my kin sister. Um, I love that. Like the one scene, it's like you see the queen, and then you turn around and you see, and she's like this evil
Oh, that's such
witch.
a good scene. I love that scene.
I love that. Scared the crap out of me when I got older. Like, oh, watch this. This is the coolest freaking reveal. And you see the scene where the dwarves are like, okay, we're going to the mine. Snow White, do not let anyone in the house. Basically, you're trying to hide out because Huntsman tried to kill you because Evil Queen wants you dead. So lock the door, don't talk to anybody.
Right.
While they're out, she decides to befriend an old woman. You wouldn't turn away an old
Right.
woman, wouldn't you?
Right.
And we see the scene before where she dips the asshole, it's like hissing like it's an acid. And we're yelling, don't do this, don't do this. And she does, bites the apple, boom, she's freaking dead. Everybody's crying. The animals are crying and everything. The prince comes by, kisses her, she comes back to life. Moral of the story is you may not exactly have a prince to come and kiss you to wake you up. So don't open the door for strange people and eat what they offer you. So that tale was in there. That was always the morality in that particular tale. All right, so they create the Seven Dwarfs Mine Train,
Oh, right. Yeah.
which it doesn't do that. It's
No.
just you're
Yeah.
in the cart,
That's 100%
you're
correct.
in the mine, and you come back down, and guess what? Everybody's dancing around and singing. It's like, okay, there was that scene because
Mhm.
it was bonded, one of my favorite musical number scenes in a cartoon. That scene with the where they're playing around and they're singing. You have Dopey on top of, I forget who it was, so he's as tall as as Snow White. That particular attraction, there was nothing to it, just in the mine, and hey, now we're at the end all dancing together. And it's just like, I spent 2 hours waiting in line for this. No story. Um, a bin where if you wanted to buy these plastic jewels, you could, but there was nothing like Snow White scary, adventures. And I have noticed that a lot. There's that one. Also, I may get in trouble, but I will say this anyway. Splash Mountain,
Mm,
that
mm.
original story, which my father got in trouble for certain bad words at the end when he said what Burr Rabbit did at the end and tried to get thrown into the briar patch. It was all about Burr Rabbit getting into trouble and
Mm.
all these warnings about, people tell you to avoid certain people. You need to avoid these people. You need to not get in trouble. But a rabbit's always getting in trouble. And even the other animals are just like, he's so stupid, he's gonna get, in trouble, again. And that was the moral that was in that particular ride, even though he was crafty enough to get out of it. Now that they're overhauling Splash Mountain, and now it's going to be Tiana's Bayou Adventure.
Mm.
Supposedly, the moral with that is teaching the community to be self-sufficient or something,
Yeah.
something like that, some kind of collectivist method and
Right.
message. And it's just like, that's not what we go on these attractions for. We go on these attractions to relive a certain story. It's not
Mm.
like we're going on this attraction to say, relive Tiana putting her own restaurant together,
Right.
or the hard work that she puts into it, or even like say the people who come to bring certain things, because New Orleans, it's like a fusion of so many cultures. It's like French, Spanish, African, Native. Imagine all these people saying, hey, you need this, you need andouille, you need sassafras, you need this, you need this, that kind of unifying message.
Mm.
But that doesn't seem like what we're gonna get. So I agree with you there with that. There's a lot of these simplistic messages that they're putting in there, but it doesn't really do anything or teach you anything, or even just say, even if you didn't believe in it, guess what? They kind of put that out there, for you. So I've noticed that with that, I love Stitch, but Stitch's Great Escape, no. Put it back to Alien Encounter because that was, I love that. I love that attraction. It was Alien Encounter. It was great.
I never got to ride that. I think I've ridden Stitches. Yeah, I've ridden Stitches once, but I never got to ride Alien Encounter.
Alien Encounter. Once again, I love scaring the heck out of my little sister. Hi, I love you, Talia. Um, Literally, Alien. and it's dark and you just hear breathing and it's like it's moving around the room and somebody's neck gets broken and you know it's water that falls on you but you think it's blood and it was so freaking fun. I mean, it was a great suspension of disbelief and sensory deprivation to actually elicit that kind of response. Everything only because it's dark. The way that they use the sound and the sound systems from like stereo to monaural and how they manipulate that with lighting, with smell, with smoke, with the story set up, it was truly an experience, even though it scared the crap out of you. But it was master storytelling
That's
by
awesome.
Imagineer, and there was nothing quite like it. Well, okay, granted, no moral lesson in there, but shoot, it was good.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's awesome. Well, you know what you mentioned Splash Mountain and the retheme, and I think that one of the things I find really fascinating about that retheme, and I'm not intimately familiar because I haven't looked into it all that much. What the news story is going to be like? You mentioned like working together and the communal aspects of or sustainability kind of like message.
Mm-hmm.
Um, what I find so interesting about that is that we have rides that are examples of we're going to put you in the story that we've already told. Like the Ariel's Undersea Adventure. It's just a retelling of The
Yeah.
Little Mermaid, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what I find so interesting about this choice is that Princess and the Frog is actually my favorite 2D animated film that Disney's ever done. The
Mm.
reason for that is because it speaks to me on several levels. Um, One, I love the setting and I love the music. So not having that music and like, the setting's similar, but not having that music really bums me out because it's some of
Yeah.
my favorite Disney music. Secondly, it is about it actually has two different messages in that film that I think are incredibly relatable and really powerful for us. The first one is a young woman who has a dream based on an experience she shared with her father, and she legitimately becomes an entrepreneur in the pursuit of this dream that she has. That's a killer message. I would love to. My wife and I don't have kids, but if I had kids, or if was going to take my nephew, I would love to take him on that ride and be like, "Look how cool it is that you can be an entrepreneur." So that message is missing. It sounds like, which bums me
Mm-hmm.
out. The second message in that film, which I think is phenomenal, they got some. This is an interesting thing because they got some heat for this message, and I think that was unfair. But they got some of the heat that said like, well, it's unfair that we. And I think part of it was because we finally got a black princess, and then she turns into a frog for a large part of the film, right? And I won't touch that. That's for other people to debate. But let me tell you how the
I'll
frogs hit
touch it,
me.
but anyway,
Yeah,
go ahead.
yeah, you can speak to it. What I loved about it though was that it took the normal fairy tale and it flipped it on its head. Sort of similar to how you were describing Snow White, right? It was saying like be careful of the promises that exist from people who do not have your best interests in mind and who may lie to you so that they get their objective and you don't get yours. And so the whole theory of it being like, well, if you kiss me, I'll turn back into this handsome prince, but it's reversed is, I thought, fantastic. It was like we've already seen the other one, undo number of times. We've seen it unfold a bunch of times, but this is
Mm-hmm.
not something that we've seen frequently. And I really like the fact that it becomes a cautionary tale, not to put your. So what do we know from Tiana? She knows if I get the work done and I put in the work, I get to have my dreams of being an entrepreneur. But this whole fanciful thing where I have a promise of something that could just pick me up and take me out of my environment and just all of a sudden save me by having this rich prince come and save me, that doesn't work for her. And so it goes back to the prior message being like the hard work's going to get you there, not the lucky thing that you did by kissing a frog. And I thought that message was just really powerful too, because that spoke to me. So I'm bummed out that they're not just taking those messages from that film, which I think are really strong and really cool, and just putting those in the new ride. That would be amazing. So what's your take on that? How do you?
It would. I saw Princess and the Frog. It was okay. It was okay. I love the music. Love the music. You're bang on about the lessons in it. Like I did not expect. It's like, oh yeah, she's gonna kiss him. He's gonna turn into a prince, and then I guess that's gonna be the next story. You
Right.
did not expect for her to turn into a frog, and I just laughed my ass off. I said, this is gonna be funny. How are they going to, get out of this particular situation? So it kind of took like a different turn. So I did like that. uh One of the things, and I will touch it because frankly I thought it was ridiculous, the thing of, well, we finally have a black princess and then she turns into a frog, and I'm just like, well, it's in the story. I mean, it's
Right.
it's like that's how the story went. I mean, she did turn back into it, but let's be realistic here. It follows, the momentum of the story. I thought it was just a real nitpick. Even when some of them tried to say, well, oh, her skin tone isn't right. It's just like, shut up. She looks fine. She looks fine. Some people just have things to pick at, but that's probably the last. I think that was the last 2D um, hand drawn
Yeah.
animated feature that Disney did. The Bayou was gorgeous.
Amazing.
Ray the Firebug, I like him. Like
He's
the bug.
awesome.
Oh my gosh, he was so funny. He was so funny. He
He
sounded
was
just
great.
like some people I know in Louisiana.
That's perfect.
But it was yeah, it was fun. It was fun to watch. My favorite 2D is Aladdin animated.
Oh yeah, Len's fantastic.
That one, I love that one. But technology wise, because it had actually spoken to who did I talk to about that? Oh my God, I cannot believe can't believe I'm blanking out on I'm blanking out on this. Oh no, Disney George. Talk to him about it.
Oh yeah, Disney George.
In awesome guy, he's so cool.
Yeah.
In Beauty and the Beast, which was my mother's favorite animation. I'm like, it's okay, it's all right. Yeah, the songs are catchy. I didn't gravitate to it like I did with Aladdin because I love Princess Jasmine. But
Mm.
the scene in the ballroom when they start dancing and you see the shift in perspective and you see how Belle's dress flows around her when the beast turns around. I'm just like, that to me was just like the perfect balance of CGI and hand drawn. It's like you cannot underestimate that particular technical feat. And it just made it, just even more magical with that.
Absolutely. That's a fantastic scene. And you're right. The one of the things that Disney has done really well too is sometimes Disney is first onto the scene, so to speak, with its technology. But what they do really well is even if they're not first onto the scene with it, the way that they incorporate it into the overall story is
Mhm.
always amazing. So I would give Disney a lot of credit in that area too. I mean, they did so many things in early animation, and so many techniques that were involved in early animation became the norm. And then, of course, they bought Pixar, and Pixar was the innovator in all of the 3D animation.
Mhm.
Um, but the way that Disney incorporates those techniques is top tier most of the time. Again, most of the time, maybe not all the
Yeah,
time,
mo
but most
most
of
of
the
the
time.
time. I
Yeah,
just remember I forget which special I watched, because I was nerding out, where they were showing, like, the computer rendering and how they did it, like, frame by frame. I was like, "This is freaking cool. Computers can
yeah.
do that? Okay."
Yeah, I know, it's awesome. I mean, it's kinda like, I felt that way too about this is a non-Disney movie, but I felt that way too about Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. It was like, "Wow, this is a new thing, like, this is
Yeah.
amazing." Like, that remains one of my favorite comic book movies just because of how creative it was and how powerful the story was too. The story I felt like was really good from multiple angles. But yeah, the things that they're doing these days with the storytelling, it's good. It's a good time to be alive from that standpoint for sure.
Mhm, absolutely. It's amazing. some of the stuff that they can come up with. I'm just but yes, Into the Spider-Verse, I like that much more than I thought I was going to, and I can't wait for the sequel this summer. It's gonna be
I
freaking
know.
cool.
Couple months left. I know it's going to be amazing. I love it.
So cool. It's gonna be so cool. So what started you on this YouTube journey? What got you into YouTube?
Oh, this is so it depends on how much you want me to go back on this one. So let me I'll just say that I started writing at a pretty young age, like in my preteens or even a little bit earlier than that. And and I can talk about my writing journey is a little bit different, so I won't go into all of that particularly. But as I grew in my writing journey, I learned several things. I learned kind of like what kind of writer I wanted to be, and I
Hmm.
realized kind of what kind of stories I wanted to tell. Um, early in my career, in my writing career, I had done pretty well in a few screenplay contests, and I got a little bit involved with the um, Christian filmmaking environment, and it's not an environment that I fit into in any way, shape, or form. It just didn't. There was no connection. They weren't telling the kinds of stories I wanted to tell. The kinds of stories
Hmm.
they wanted to tell, I felt like were actually in sometimes I won't say that this is true of all of them, but antithetical to what I felt like the Bible was actually teaching. And I felt like, well, you're doing some stories that I don't think are good for people because I think that they add confusion to what who Jesus Christ is and what truth is. And I think you
Hmm.
actually are not. So I got out of that environment. I divested from that environment a little bit, and in 2016 we started a production company, a nonprofit production company called the Reclamation Society. And what we
Hmm.
really wanted to do was we really wanted to tell stories that would draw people into conversations about truth. Now, for us, we define truth as being truth equals Jesus Christ, right? And when people when I say that, we'd have to go into a lot of unpacking to come up with what that means. But a lot of times people think that when I say truth equals Jesus Christ, that is a very complex, incredibly nuanced thing to say. It's not easy. It's not easy to get to truth. Christian films, the problem I have with them is a lot of times it makes it seem like it's easy to get to truth, and it makes it seem like there are certain things that can happen that that it almost turns Christianity into this like magic thing, right? Like, well, if only you had this magic thing, your life would be so much better. And I just
Hmm.
don't believe that that's true. That's not where my faith comes from. So we started the company to really be able to explore the concept of truth. Now we have a perspective on that, but we do not pretend that we understand what truth is until we really dig down deep into it to have a fuller understanding of what it means to experience something. So even though you might say, well, I would tell you I'm a Christ follower. What I would not also say is that I can tell you exactly the truth of every scenario that we ever find. It takes a long time to get to the true nature of truth. You have to invest a lot. You have to understand different people's perspectives. You have to understand different cultural perspectives. It takes a long time and a lot of research to get to a place where you can say, I believe that based on what I have learned, that the story that we are now going to tell you has any semblance of truth to it. So we started a production company, and we had two primary projects. We had a Star Wars short film, which you can watch on
Hmm.
our channel right now. And that was, we specifically told that story not to be like just another lightsaber battle, though there is a lightsaber battle in it, but
Okay.
rather to kind of explore some kind of concept of truth, right? And I had just been experiencing my life had my life had been experiencing some people around me getting bullied, and so
Hmm.
I took that on and I said, like, what happens to people when they get bullied? And that's what that film is about. It's not a PSA. It's kind of it's a sort of a tragedy to an extent, but asking the question of what happens to people when they get bullied, not all the time, but what happens sometimes when people get bullied. That's what the short film did. Then we
Hmm.
did another novel. I've got it right here, actually, and a full cast audiobook of Death of a Bounty Hunter. This is our original IP. This is like a story that we did. It's like a west, like a
Oh,
It's like a sci-fi
Hang on, let me
western,
blow
fantasy
you up.
western.
Hold on. Let me blow you up. Let me blow you up.
Oh yeah, there it is. There it is. So you can
Yeah, so we
go
can see the title.
check
There
this
we
out.
go.
Yeah, Death of a Bounty Hunter. Shout out to Nathan Sheck. He's my co-writer, and he did the artwork along with Malachi Ward on the front there. But that novel is about a bounty hunter's shame and guilt, and how he deals with that shame and guilt, and all of the things that are going on around him. And again, you wouldn't read this book and be like, oh, you just hit me over the head with this Christian message. It's not about that. It's about really trying to figure out what is the truth of how shame and guilt appear in people's lives, and what is the truth about how you either succumb to shame and guilt
Mm-hmm.
and basically have a death, versus understanding what shame and guilt means, trying to deal with it in your life and wrestle with it in your life, and getting out onto the living side of things. And again, metaphorically speaking, that's what that book is about. And so how does YouTube come into this, right? Like, why does YouTube matter and all of these things? So what happened was, when we started the short film and we started doing the book, what we realized is that in between projects, we would have all of this extensive time where people wouldn't be hearing from us at all, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
what we did was we started a podcast first. We started the Story Geeks podcast. And the Story Geeks podcast was meant to dig deeper into all of the films that we loved, to try and find what kind of truth they were telling, or if they were trying to pervert the truth in some way and give us messages that didn't make sense, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so we did a bunch of shows that were all in podcast format. You can still go back and listen to them. They're still on
Okay.
the How Stories Work with Jay Sherer channel. And those stories were we had people on the show from the Empire podcast. We had comic book writers on the show. We had really fantastic guests, and the podcast started to get pretty famous. Actually, it started to get pretty popular. But then I had, yeah, there you go. Yeah, that's my YouTube channel there. But then during the pandemic, that podcast fell apart a little bit because I had brought on a whole team of people, and then as the pandemic started, a bunch of them could no longer work on it. And
Mm-hmm.
so I said, you know what? If they're not able to help me out and they're not really invested in it, I probably need to do something a little bit different. And so that's when I
Mm-hmm.
transformed. So what I did was I approached Orange Grove 55, and I said to Orange Grove 55, I go, I really like the nuanced discussions that you guys have. And the Story Geeks is sort of supposed to do that. It's supposed to be different than other shows where we're just talking about what we like and not like. We want to ask some questions that are a little bit deeper. Like, for example, one of the questions we asked on the episode, I think it was 2 episodes prior to the one you were with us on, we
Mm-hmm.
asked the question about the Mandalorian of why does the Mandalorian continue to use phrases and metaphors that we would have found in the early church? Like, why does it do that? What's going on? Why would it do that? Why would it do something like that? And we had a discussion about it. And by the way, most of the people on the Story Geeks podcast are not people of faith per se. And so we're just asking the general population, like, what do you think
Mm-hmm.
about this? What do you think is going on here? And so I said to OG, I said, I know you've been wanting to get into like TV and movie stuff because you've mostly been in the parks. Well, what if we bring the Story Geeks podcast over to your channel, and that we have Orange Grove 55 has a show on your channel called the Story Geeks, and we'll just port the show over. Because OG does all the posting, he does
Mm-hmm.
he does all that kind of stuff. I don't have to worry about that at all I got to do is show up with questions. And then I also took on the How Stories Work channel, and on that channel is where I have more conversations with storytellers. And so that's where
Ah,
I'll be on
okay.
that channel talking about people. So I got a chance to talk to Drunk 3PO. He's up there on one of the latest videos because he's doing a new graphic novel, and I just wanted to hear about his experience with that.
Yeah, the
Um,
Achromatic Chronicles. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And I'm talking about, I talked to my literary professor in college who is helping me out in my writing journey, and we talked about Huckleberry Finn and banning books and all that kind of stuff. So that's what I do on that channel. I talk to people who are more involved in the storytelling process. Where on the
Mm-hmm.
Story Geeks, we talk more about like what's going on in pop culture stories and what do we feel like is meaningful about them. And those are the two different ways that we got there.
That is really, really cool. I like asking people kind of how they how they wound up on YouTube, and the stories are just so varied and so interesting. And it's very interesting what you said about the Mandalorian and the question that you threw out. Some things that you would hear like in the early church was funny because I was reading something in Proverbs and I was like, that sounds a whole lot like you don't speak, one does not speak unless one knows, or something
That's
like
right.
that.
That's
I'm
right.
just like, wow, that's actually pretty I just thought that was kind of wild when I saw that. I'm like, huh, okay, yeah, that kind of fits, even though, yeah, Proverbs. But I was like, cool, that's actually really interesting.
Yeah, yeah. I
Really,
mean,
really interesting.
there's one thing that is very fascinating to me about truth. And truth. You can tell something is true if it speaks to people across all different cultures. Like we talked about Steamboat Willie. There's something about Steamboat Willie that is getting at some form of truth because it's speaking to people across different cultures. The tricky part about things like whether or not we're trying to define what truth is. This is where it gets really, really tricky. And this is one of the reasons why I wanted to start the Story Geeks podcast, is that storytellers can also just repeat back to you the lie that you wish was true. And so that's where it gets tricky, is that as we identify
Hmm.
what stories are and as we try to break down what occurs in stories to try and find meaning and purpose in them, we have to keep in mind that there are some people out there that have perverted truth to becoming propaganda. And propaganda
Mm.
is some person's view of the truth that remains untested and that large swaths of the population probably do not agree with as being true. And so, and of course, you can always lie to yourself and not believe the truth and feel like the truth is a lie. That's also something that you can do. And those kind of conversations to me are some of the most fascinating conversations that I have, right? Because it's kind of like, what do you believe is true and why do you believe it's true? And it's so interesting to me because I'll have people talk to me about stories that they love and feel and care deeply about, where they'll
Hmm.
say, this story really spoke to me because it says this, this, and this. And I'll be like, but does the story actually say that? Because if you look at the actions in the story, some of those actions are a counterpoint to what you just said is true about that story. So are you sure you're not just trying to read in what you wanted to take out of that story, which humans have the ability to do, right? Like we have very much the ability to take what we want out of a story and push everything else
Hmm.
to the side. And I fall into the same category. There's times when I like love a story so much that sometimes I don't really realize that, like, oh, I think there's some propaganda that's worked in there that's not actually the way that the world works. And sometimes we should just escape the stories and not worry about it. So it's not every story that we need to worry about that, but it's a good time, and it's very rewarding to me because I get a chance to really process some of these things that people really care about and have meaningful conversations with them about it.
Hmm. That's really cool. It's very interesting perspective. I was actually trying to think of the last book where I actually had that happen. I can't recall. I can't. I can't recall it. It's just one of the things that's very interesting about Disney is when they will adapt
Mm.
certain tales, like the Snow Queen, which I read, which of course is Frozen, and then with the Little Mermaid, because it was funny when I first saw the animated feature. I'm like, that's not how the story went. I mean, the
Right.
sea witch stuff, that was true,
Right.
but there wasn't this happy ever after ending. And the
No.
moral of that story was that you should be happy with where you are, happy with who you are.
Yeah.
And I always found it
Absolutely.
interesting. I was like, "Huh, that part's kind of, missing." There were other things in there,
Yeah.
like not wanting to leave your family, wanting to be true to what it is that calls you, and, exploration has a price,
Yeah.
sometimes. So, it's like it wasn't bad, but I just found that interesting. I'm like, okay, I guess that'd be a real downer."
Yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly. Well, and it's interesting you mentioned that too because a friend of mine, a screenwriter friend of mine. Which if you go to the live button that we're looking at now, and you
Mm-hmm.
can listen to that scene right there, Once Upon a Time in the West, a great opening scene.
Mm-hmm.
That first one, Leo Partible, friend of mine, screenwriter, he said something to me that I felt like was such an insightful way of viewing some of Disney's stories. He said to me, he goes, we're talking about Once Upon a Time in the West, which has one of the best opening scenes in the history of cinema. And
Mm-hmm.
but he said to me, he went off on a tangent and he started talking about Marvel. And he and I both really like what DC has tried to do. They've messed up a lot of things, but back when Snyder was doing the DC, there were things that he and I really connected with. And one of the things that he told me that I felt like was really accurate, a really accurate way of describing the MCU versus the DCU or DCEU,
Mm-hmm.
is that he goes, the MCU is all about the American myth, while the DCEU is all about the American dream. And I go, interesting. Tell me more about that. And he goes,
Mm-hmm.
the MCU almost always shows the world back to us as we wish the world was, meaning that the characters go through some little hardships, but they're ultimately always accepted and they ultimately always succeed. And the hardships that they go through are not always related necessarily to something deep down inside them, but like just breaking through societal barriers. And once the societal barriers are broken through, like the world changes and everyone's good again and everyone's happy again. And that's a myth because we don't find that in real life. You don't get to do, you don't get to do one thing and it solves all the people's perspectives about you around you. You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? Like that's not what we experience. But what he said was, what he liked about the DCEU was, he said it's far more about the American dream, which means that it is a more correct assessment of where the world is. Notice how in Man of Steel, Clark says, I feel like I'm an outsider. No one wants to accept me. I don't even feel like Jonathan Kent. I don't even feel like you're my real dad. And he turns to his son and says, of course you're my son. And the whole journey that Clark has to go through is that the world does not accept him as one of us. And that doesn't change by the end of the movie. Nobody's by the end of the movie suddenly accepting of Clark, right? Instead, he has to learn how to interact with his environment despite how the world views him. And so I really like that form of storytelling because I feel like it's a little bit more accurate to the lived experience. It's great to escape to Marvel films. Don't get me wrong. Marvel has done some great films, not recently, but in years past. And yet there's an escapism there that is not as present in the DCEU. And I thought what he said there was really insightful. And I think that to your point about The Little Mermaid and how the actual fairy tale goes compared to the Disney film goes, it was made more into American myth as opposed to what you would call more of like a real world environment where we actually got a message that was like, this is how harsh the world really is.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it was insightful on your point to bring that up. It was insightful of Leo to kind of make that distinction for me. And I went, that's exactly why I like some of these DC films better than the Marvel films, because they just assume that everything's going to work out great and everyone's going to be happy with each other. And the
Mm-hmm.
conflict that we have is mild and fleeting. But that's not true. We know it's not true because we walk around in a world where the conflict is all around us all the time. So,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Although I could not stand Man of Steel, uh,
You didn't like it?
I was with Man of Steel until the way that Jonathan Kent went out, and
Uh,
that ticked me off. And that time I was just like, I do not want to pay any more attention to what's going on with this film. I did watch Batman versus Superman. I had to watch the extended version because
yeah.
the original, I was just like, no, this is like, it just seemed like a jumbled up mess. So when I watched the
Yes.
extended edition, I was like, okay, this
Yes.
makes sense because you're right. And with the DC films, It's more of like the reality. This is kind of like what the reality is. You don't have villains who are just gonna wake up one day and say, "Hey, guess what? I'm not gonna do this anymore." It's like no, they're still screwed up. They're still gonna blow stuff up and still, still hurt people. Justice League. I did not like Justice League. I freaking hated it.
Oh,
I'm not a huge DC fan. I'm kind of like a normie. So
yeah, yeah.
Zack Snyder's Justice League, I really did like. I did
Yes.
enjoy. I did enjoy watching that for a whole lot of reasons. That was fun. That was fun to watch.
Yeah.
But yeah, thanks for adding on to that. I will have to actually check out this video.
Yeah, yeah, you'll have to watch it. And by the way, the Justice League is my most disappointing film of all time. I cannot stand the Justice League. And it is because of what you were saying is that first of all, the way that they treated Zack Snyder amongst a family tragedy he was having was awful.
Yeah.
And secondly, to bring in someone like Joss Whedon, who did not even at all agree with anything that Zack Snyder was doing, and have him just completely rearrange the trilogy that was being put in place was really frustrating. And so I was really happy to see Justice League come out, Zack Snyder's Justice League, because that one made a lot more sense to me and was a lot more fun. Not to say that those
Oh.
movies don't have their problems. They definitely have their problems, but there's something in them that I gravitate to a little bit more.
Yeah, I know as a normie when I was watching them, granted, I didn't particularly care for Man of Steel. I love Henry Cavill as Superman.
Yeah.
He is Superman. um, Batman versus Superman. I mean, while I wasn't like enamored by them,
Mm,
Justice League threw so much stuff out of whack. I didn't know the deal
yeah.
behind what happened with Zack Snyder. I just knew that I was watching something that did not jive with the other two
Correct.
movies that I saw. And I'm asking people, I'm like, Justice League, that movie sucked. And they said, yeah, what happened with Zack Snyder? I'm like, oh, okay, all right, whew. Because I
Yeah.
said something was severely wrong with that film. So I was like, okay, I'm not crazy, I'm not clueless.
Exactly.
It just didn't fit. So there's
Exactly.
actually one more thing that I want to run past you really, really quick, and this
Yeah,
gets
let's do it.
down to 2D animation. Now, the Aristocats was a 2D
Mm,
animation that I liked as well. There was a bunch of them with respect to Disney, but like the Rescuers, I loved that one. The Aristocats, I love cats, and I loved the jazz music that was in this particular animation. Well, it turns out they're going to do a live action version. Now, I'm kind of like this. I'm like, okay, if they do not use CGI and they use like cats with like trainers that, okay, you do this, if they do it like that, if Questlove, who is from The Roots, which is a hip hop group, I said, if they do something like a hip hop soul soundtrack and the music is just insane, this could be good.
mhm.
But given Disney's track record of live action remakes outside of the Jungle Book, as far as I'm concerned, that's a one off. I like the Jungle Book. It actually, when I was watching it, I actually thought of the book itself that I
Mm,
read
mm.
several times over. That was pretty cool. It's like Disney has an addiction to live action remakes, and I just
Yeah.
kind of want your opinion. Do you think that these live action remakes are because maybe it's like they don't want to take risks with something different or something new, because it's almost eye rolling in a way when it's just like, okay, here's another live action remake, Lilo and Stitch live action remake. I'm already mad about that because I love Lilo and Stitch, the animated cartoon. Stitch is my boy. Stitch is awesome. Stitch is awesome. Uh, yeah. What do you think about these live action remakes? And with what I told you, what do you think about this one?
This is a really good question. And I have a fun fact for you first, because one of my friends works at Disney. And when I was out there recently at Disneyland, when I was out there recently for the 100th anniversary. I don't know if they're doing this at WGW. You'll have to tell me, but they're letting cast members with their name badge. They're letting them put
Mhm.
who their favorite character is on their name badge. And so the fun
Hmm.
fact is that Stitch is the most selected character of everybody in the Disneyland resort. For whatever reason, that's the most popular one. But my friend chose Captain America, which is great. Okay, so back to live action remakes. So here's where I'm going to take off my creative hat for a minute. I'll get back to
Mhm.
the actual aristocrats in a minute here, but let's look at Disney holistically from a live action remake perspective.
Okay.
And I'm going to put on my business hat. And when you put on your business hat, live action remakes suddenly look a lot different, right? Because if you have your creative hat on, you go, what is the point of this? And I don't understand why would a live action rendering of this tale be better than the original animation that we already have? It doesn't make any sense to me, especially if you grew up like I did with these kind of animation things. Why would this happen? And the problem is when you put on your business hat and you realize how much money these movies make, it's almost like, look, we can go print money if we make these movies. Now, the only
Mm.
thing that I have a caution of in terms of Aristocats, which by the way I can't even remember, so I'm gonna have to go back and watch it again because I can't even hardly remember it.
It was
Um,
fun. Ava
is it fun?
Gabor.
Oh, wow.
Ava
Yes,
Gabor
okay,
does the
okay.
voice. Yes.
Yeah, 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 okay. Okay, so yeah, that actually brings back a couple memories that you say that. So here's where I would go with the Aristocats. Is it going to be something that's popular? I have no clue. But I will tell you this, is that Questlove did an amazing documentary last year. He won an Oscar for
Yes,
it,
the Summer
2022.
of Soul. Yes.
So good. Such a good documentary. Um, He is an amazing performer. The Roots are phenomenal. I love when you put the Roots together with somebody like Common or somebody like Talib Kweli or someone
Mhm.
in that whole vein that I'm in, right? Like that's my kind of music. So can Questlove deliver, and does it make sense from a business perspective? Yes, it does. Both of those things make sense. The thing that makes a little bit less sense, and by the way, this could be live action in terms of what they said about the Lion King being live action, which was just really realistic 3D. Maybe that's what this one is too. I don't know. Will it be any good? I mean, I think if Questlove puts his spin on it and he's given the
Mhm.
creative freedom to do so, and the support of Disney Studios to do it. And if they don't do what we saw with the Cats stage,
Ugh.
which is awful.
Oh, that was bad.
Yeah, don't put people in costumes. Just don't do
No,
that,
don't do
Questlove.
that.
Then I think that we could have something pretty creative and pretty cool, and not as cookie cutter as the previous live action remakes have been. And so I would
Mhm.
look forward to that with Quest. But one other thing I want to respond to just really quickly before we move on from this is that I completely agree with you. I think the Jungle Book is by far the best live action. And here's the thing. That's not a common a lot of people don't agree with us on that. They kind of go like, oh yeah, Jungle Book is fine. I'm like, it was the best one. It made the most sense. It was the most entertaining. The musical numbers were fantastic, and I
Oh,
didn't think they could pull them
yeah.
off. you know? So we were in agreement on that. I think that was the best one.
I agree, especially considering John Favreau directed it, especially those action scenes with the animals and ugh, I freaking loved it. But yeah, when I heard about first I saw live action
Yeah.
and like my back went up. I'm like, I don't know. And then I saw the Aristocrats and I saw Questlove and I'm like, okay, we'll see where this goes.
Yes. 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 Yeah, I mean they've had like none of the ones that they've done. I'm trying to think if there's any of them that I really disliked. I'm not as big of a Here's where it gets interesting. I am kind of a fan of taking a
Mhm.
character story that we thought we knew and then telling the backstory in a way that brings some more appreciation of that character.
Mhm.
However, I'm not in favor if they take it so far as to make us feel so sorry for that character that it kind of gives that character a pass for being how evil they are. Like Maleficent did
Maleficent.
that a little bit. Yeah, exactly. Um,
I was so
and
disappointed.
yeah, it went too far, and I think so did the one what was the name of the actual film? I don't think it was called 101 Dalmatians, was it? It was called something
Cruella.
else. Cruella. Yeah,
Yeah.
those two went a little bit too far into sort of like we're gonna put you in a place where you understand. So there's two things going on right here. This is I feel very strongly about this. If you want to talk about truth in storytelling, there's no such thing as anyone who's 100% a hero or 100% a villain. Every human being is capable of good and evil, and it is the embodiment of every person, right? um, and so I think that we can make two mistakes. We can try to say, if we understand why someone made the decisions they made, we can excuse their behavior. I don't think that's true. The behavior is the behavior, and if it's evil, then it's evil. We can say that person needs redemption. We want to be forgiving of that person, but we can't say like, oh, they're really not that bad, because they did bad things. They're bad. But at the same time, we also can't make heroes into people who are so perfect that we would never see them in real life. It just doesn't work. Captain America, as much as I love that character and I love Chris
Mhm.
Evans in that role, is he's I don't think he's done anything wrong in his entire life, right? Like, and that's not really true. Like, we human beings are not perfect. They are going to do things they should not do. That's just the human condition. So do I like the live action remakes? Sometimes. I think I've paid to see most of them, so Disney's winning on the business side because they're getting me to do it.
Mhm.
But they are spotty, right? They're not always on point. But you know what? Good on Questlove for stepping to the table and saying, like, I want to do this film. I
Yeah.
think that, to your point, the point you made was saying that he's associated with it is instantly interesting because of who Questlove is. And so if he can bring that to the table, then the movie will be interesting, and then we're on solid ground. If you told me that they were going to do an Aristocrats movie and I don't know, Taylor Swift was going to do it, I'd be like, I'm out.
Yeah.
I'm not interested. This is not my jam. Like, I'm good.
No, thank you.
Yeah, but Questlove, I'm in. I'm in on Questlove.
Yeah, I am too. I was actually, when I saw his name, I'm like, oh, okay, okay. This soundtrack better not be less than fire.
Oh
It's
yeah.
just, it's just gonna have to be. Oh, well, Jay, thank you so very much for joining me. This is such a great discussion. I love meeting people, talking to people, finding out more about them, especially talking Disney. So thanks so much for being here. And tell the folks where they can reach you on social media.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate it. And I'm always long-winded. So you said who will go for about an hour, and I've already almost got you to an hour and a half. And so I
Oh, we always
apologize. Too
overshoot.
too much. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Too, saying too much on my end. That's cool. Yeah, so you can
No
find
way.
me on Twitter at Jay Sherer, just right here. If you look at the screen there, at JaySherer. Generally speaking, I am tweeting about stories and storytelling, whether it's movies or books or whatever, and talking about some of the shows that we've been working on as well. So you can find me over there. Every once in a while, I get into some of the scripts I'm working on, or some of the books I'm working on. I'm always working on a script or a book. In fact, we're doing a table read tomorrow of one of my scripts. I'm really excited about that because we're going to film it later this year. So that's going to be really cool.
Awesome.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm on Twitter talking about that stuff. It's probably the best place to follow me. It's the place where I'm the most active, even though Twitter does depress me some days. Twitter, you depress me some days.
Tell me about it.
Yeah.
It's like it's depressing, but you know what? All my friends are on there. And if I disappeared, they would start freaking out and my phone would
Exactly.
start blowing up with messages. Where are you? Where are you? Not on Twitter. Where are you?
But I really do enjoy following you because I really enjoy your takes. I really enjoy the fact that if you're going to be negative about something, you're not negative in like a, the word toxic gets thrown around too often these days. And I think it's misused a lot of times. But there are people on Twitter who are definitely toxic by the standard definition that we should use for the word toxic. And you are not that way. And so I really appreciate that. I appreciate you sharing the
Well,
Bible
thank
verses.
you.
That's always encouraging
Thank
to me as
you.
well.
Thank
And
you.
so, yeah, definitely follow Lorena. If you're not following Lorena, you should be following Lorena, but you can follow me too. I don't post as many of those kinds of things, but I try and get into some discussions here and there.
Well, thank you. I just kind of shoot my mouth off on Twitter about innocuous stuff or whatever. But when something really, really gets to me, I'll go somewhat scorched earth, depending on
Depending on what
what's
it
going
is.
on.
I thought your I
Depends
thought
on
your
what it
takes
is.
on I thought your takes on the Jonathan Majors stories were really good too. It's like people were just jumping into every conclusion. There's this thing that Twitter does. This is the word that Twitter gets negative, and you can cut this out of the podcast if you want to. But Twitter goes down a path of doing what the Mandalorian doing the opposite of what the Mandalorian was recommending. Don't speak unless you know. Twitter is like, just give your opinion, even if you have no clue and have no authority to do so. Twitter's like, please do that. And that's unfortunate because there are people out there who maybe they need help, maybe they need guidance, maybe they're being falsely accused, maybe they're being lied about, and yet Twitter will spread those things anyways. And so there's no such thing as due diligence on Twitter. And that's really a bummer because due diligence is something that our society has to be built upon. Otherwise, we will never find the truth and will be constantly lied to. And that's a
Yeah,
huge bummer.
you are 100% right because I have a relative who I think he just got released from uh, from prison. Yes, some of us have relatives that are like that, and the reason why he was no, he wasn't prison, he was jail. Reason why it was a domestic situation, and he was falsely accused of it and went to jail for quite an amount of time. So they had to work that through the system where he was exonerated. But people make the false assumption of thinking that arrest
Mhm.
equals conviction. And people are like, well, this happened, and why did they must have called the cops if it was serious? I'm just like, none of you have ever watched Cops, have you?
Right,
Have
exactly.
you? When they get to
Exactly.
a domestic situation and they're trying to figure out what the heck is going on, it can be he said, she said,
Mhm.
and one episode they're just like, okay, just to keep the peace, we're taking the husband down to to the jail, and we'll get this all sorted out tomorrow. We'll go get their statement, that statement, and find the heck what else, what is going on. So one of the things that really irritated me is that you have this tendency, especially on Twitter,
Mm.
to make people guilty until proven
Yeah.
innocent. Granted, I can't stand Ezra Miller at all. I
Right, right, right.
cannot freaking stand him. I'm just like, man, if these charges stick, maybe I shouldn't take pleasure in it, but really,
Right.
actions have consequences. But it wasn't like every time I would talk, I say, well, it's alleged.
Yeah.
Alleged they did
Yeah,
so and
yeah, yeah.
so. Because until you
Yeah.
get it, once they get a conviction, yeah, then you can definitely say they did so and so.
Yeah.
But so many people on Twitter are just so quick
Mhm.
to try you in the court of public opinion, and it's really toxic, kind of like we were saying, and just disheartening when you see people buying into that narrative. And it's just like, I know some of you want clicks,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
shouldn't you wait to find out if it's true or not? I mean, there's unbiased reporting where it's just like, this is alleged, this happened, this happened. We're going to wait to
Correct.
see, what's going on. But only thing we can say for sure is that Jonathan Majors got arrested. That's the thing. So yeah, it's really rough. And like you were saying about truth, a lot of times it is difficult and can put you on the wrong side of people when you try to stand up for that and say, hey,
Yeah.
we need to wait to find out the
Mm-hmm.
truth. And so many people are in a rush, in a rush to be, I tell people, a rush to be wrong instead of
Yeah, yeah.
waiting to be right.
Yeah. Oh, and it's in there, and there's these little tricks too that people use, right? Like people will, especially in politics, which I don't like to get super political, but it happens all the time in politics,
Yep,
is that we
agree.
take these nuanced, difficult situations and we distill them down into these sentences that actually on their face make no sense, but they're meaningful to a group of people. And when you do that, you actually get further and further, in my opinion, you get further and further away from the truth. And it's unfortunate because the truth is complex and hard to understand. And if you do that, what you're doing is putting out propaganda so that you can get your base to get riled up. So whether it's from, I'll
Hmm.
just give you a couple of examples, and these are examples of there are real world issues that need to be paid attention to, but people have taken them and distilled them down into phrases. And I'm gonna pick on both parties, so I'm not too political because I'm very moderate, and I don't want everyone can be mad at me, and that's fine. But if you
That's
have
okay.
something, yeah, it's totally fine. I'm good with it. I've made my peace. I'll use two of them that I can think of right off the top of my head, although there's more that I could go to as well. But whether it's something like "Make America Great Again," that is a very catchy phrase that needs to be broken down into what it means, because if you that has removed nuance from that statement, so that if you say I love that statement, what do you mean when you say you love that statement? There's a lot of ways that America has not been great in the past that we could get in a lot to. So what do you mean when you add the word again into that phrase? And yet so many people resonate with it because they've taken a collective set of their beliefs that may have nuance or not nuance, and they go, I
Hmm.
love that phrase. But the phrase is not nuanced enough to allow us to have a real discussion about what it means. On the other side of the aisle, you'll see something along the lines of silence is violence. What does that mean? It's backed by a real world issue that has a lot of nuance to it that needs to be
Hmm.
understood. But if you distill it down into this thing that makes no sense, now it's just propaganda. And so I think that there's this issue that we have on Twitter, and this is why I was saying I was appreciative of you for, one, for standing up for like due diligence, but two, for if you give a hot take, it's usually there's usually enough nuance to it that it's not like offensive or anything. It's just your opinion. But there are these takes that people have that distill complex, nuanced things into statements that people will gravitate towards and grab onto without fully understanding what it is that it means. And that's just such a bummer, because we could be having these really good conversations about how the world should function and what we need to work on in the world. And if we distill that down into one sentence that we agree with, we'll eventually find out that we don't all agree with that sentence because it's not nuanced enough. And that is a bummer. So I will just say, I don't want to end on a negative note. I will just say definitely follow Reina because she has lots of positive, uplifting things to say and
Well,
very
thank
nuanced
you.
things to say on Twitter. And that's what Twitter needs more of.
Thank you. Thank you. It's like things get distilled into sound bites,
Yes.
so to speak,
Yep.
and that's all it seems like people have the attention span to
Exactly.
do. And it's like we don't get understanding by throwing out sound bites. I mean, you can to get people's attention, but doesn't really lend well to communication, so to speak. So
Exactly.
I try to
Exactly.
I try to throw that in there. I mean, if I'm going to call your baby ugly, I'm going to say exactly why your kid's ugly.
Exactly. 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 And I think that's getting closer to the truth. The more nuanced we can be is closer to the truth.
Absolutely. Well, man, this has been a great, great discussion. You have an open invitation to drop
Oh,
onto my
anytime,
channel.
anytime. And if you ever want to come back on the Story Geeks, you just let me know because
Oh, I
anytime.
absolutely do, because that was a blast.
Yeah, it was a fun time. It was a really fun time. We're having a really good time talking about The Mandalorian over on Orange Grove 55, the Orange Grove 55 YouTube channel. definitely check us out on there and listen and go watch the episode, last week's episode, season 3, episode 4. Lorena was on with us and had some very insightful things to say about the Mandalorian. So definitely go check that one out as well.
All right. All right. Well, folks, go follow Jay on Twitter, subscribe to him on YouTube. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure you hit that like button and share this video, and we will see you next time. Bye.